Excerpt from Hatchet by Gary Paulson. Brian Robson stared out the window of the small plane at the endless green northern wilderness below. It was a small plane, a Cessna 406, a bush plane, and the engine was so loud, so roaring and consuming and loud that it ruined any chance of conversation. Not that he had much to say. He was 13, and the only passenger on the plane was a pilot named, what was it? Jim or Jake or something, who was in his mid-40s and who had been silent as he worked to prepare for takeoff. In fact, since Brian had come to the small airport in Hampton, New York to meet the plane driven by his mother, the pilot had spoken only 5 words to him. Get in the co-pilot seat, which Brian had done. They had taken off, and that was the last of the conversation. There had been the initial excitement, of course. He had never flown in a single-engine plane before, and to be sitting in the co-pilot seat with all the controls right there in front of him, all the instruments in his face as the plane clawed for altitude, jerking and sliding on the wind currents as the pilot took off, has been interesting and exciting. Now, Brian sat looking out the window with the roar thundering through his ears, and tried to catalog what had led up to his taking this flight. The thinking started. Always it started with a single word. Divorce. It was an ugly word, he thought. A tearing, ugly word that meant fights and yelling, lawyers. God, he thought, how he hated lawyers who sat with their comfortable smiles and tried to explain to him in legal terms how all that he lived in was coming apart. And that the breaking and shattering of all the solid things. His home, his life, all the solid things. Divorce, a breaking word, an ugly breaking word. Divorce, secrets. No, not secrets so much as just the secret. What he knew and had not told anybody. What he knew about his mother that had caused the divorce. What he knew, the secret. Divorce, the secret. Brian felt his eyes beginning to burn and knew there would be tears. He had cried for a time, but that was gone now. He didn't cry now. The pilot sat large, his hands lightly on the wheel, feet on the rudder pedals. He seemed more a machine than a man, an extension of the plane. When he saw Brian look at him, the pilot seemed to open up a bit and smiled. Ever fly in the co-pilot seat before? He leaned over and lifted the headset off his right ear and put it on his temple, yelling to overcome the sound of the engine. Brian shook his head. It's not as complicated as it looks. Good plane like this almost flies itself, the pilot shrugged. Makes my job easy. He took Brian's left arm. Here, put your hand on the controls, your feet on the rudder pedals, and I'll show you what I mean. Brian shook his head. I'd better not. Sure, try it. Brian reached out and took the wheel in a grip so tight his knuckles were white. He pushed his feet down on the pedals. The plane slewed suddenly to the right. Not so hard. Take her light. Take her light. Brian eased off, relaxed his grip. The burning in his eyes was forgotten momentarily as the vibration of the plane came through the wheel and the pedals. It seemed almost alive. See? The pilot let go of his wheel, raised his hands in the air, and took his feet off the pedals to show Brian he was actually flying the plane alone. Simple. Now turn the wheel a little to the right and push on the right rudder pedal a small amount. Brian turned the wheel slightly and the plane immediately banked to the right. And when he pressed on the right rudder pedal, the nose slid across the horizon to the right. He left off on the pressure and straightened the wheel, and the plane righted itself. Now you can turn. Bring her back to the left a little. Brian turned the wheel left, pushed on the left pedal, and the plane came back around. It's easy, he smiled. At least this part. The pilot nodded. All of flying is easy, just takes learning, like everything else. He took the controls back, then reached up and rubbed his left shoulder. Aches and pains must be getting old. Brian let go of the controls and moved his feet away from the pedals as the pilot put his hands on the wheel. Thank you. But the pilot put his headset back on, and the gratitude was lost in the engine noise, and things went back to Brian looking out the window at the ocean of trees and lakes. The burning eyes did not come back, but memories did, came flooding in. The words. Always the words. Divorce, the secret, fights, split. The big split. Brian's father did not understand as Brian did, knew only that Brian's mother wanted to break the marriage apart. The split had come and then the divorce. all so fast, and the court had left him with his mother, except for the summers and what the judge called visitation rights. So formal. Number 1. Which detail best supports that Brian feels alone in the world? A. The thinking started. B. When he saw Brian look at him, the pilot seemed to open up a bit and he smiled. C. The pilot nodded. All of flying is easy, just takes learning, like everything else. But the pilot had put his headset back on and the gratitude was lost in the engine noise, and things went back to Brian looking out the window at the ocean of trees and lakes. Number 2. Read the paragraphs. Circle the underlined phrase that most helps the reader understand the meaning of the word gratitude. Brian let go of the controls and moved his feet away from the pedals as the pilot put his hands on the wheel. Thank you. But the pilot had put his headset back on, and the gratitude was lost in the engine noise, and things went back to Brian looking out the window at the ocean of trees and lakes. The burning eyes did not come back, but memories came flooding in. The words. Number 3. Read the paragraph. No, not secret so much as just the secret. What he knew and had not told anybody. What he knew about his mother that had caused the divorce. What he knew. The secret. What is the main idea of this paragraph? A. Brian's parents' divorce has been very difficult for Brian. B. Brian knows the cause of his parents' divorce. C. Brian has cried over his parents' divorce but can't cry anymore. D. Brian's mother doesn't know the true cause for the divorce. Number 4. Which detail would be the most important to include in a summary of the excerpt? A. The pilot instructs Brian to sit in the co-pilot seat at the beginning of the flight. B. Brian is able to see the controls of the plane right in front of him through the entire flight. C. Brian recalls a secret that only he knows about his mother and the divorce. D. The pilot has to yell in order to be heard over the roar of the engine. Number 5. Read the paragraph. Brian turned the wheel slightly and the plane immediately banked to the right, and when he pressed on the right rudder pedal, the nose slid across the horizon to the right. He left off on the pressure and strained the wheel, and the plane righted itself. What is the most likely meaning of the word rudder as it is used in the paragraph? A. A wheel. B. Something used for steering. C. Something used for straining things out. D. A pedal.